The American housing market just went through one of the wildest runs in modern history. From 2020 through 2023, home prices didn't just climb, they exploded. Bidding wars became the norm. Buyers waived inspections, offered cash over asking, and still lost out to someone willing to pay even more. Real estate felt like the safest bet in the country. If you've been priced out, overwhelmed, or simply waiting for the madness to end, this might be the moment you've been holding out for. Make sure to hit subscribe right now because we're tracking these shifts in real time. And today we're counting down 12 cities where home prices are absolutely crashing and selling for almost nothing. Let's get into it. Starting at number 12, we head to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Baton Rouge never made the flashy headlines like Miami or Austin, but for a while it quietly rode the same wave. Buyers fleeing higher-cost metros discovered Southern charm, lower property taxes, and decent job stability tied to petrochemical plants and state government work. Prices climbed steadily as demand ticked up. Developers responded with new subdivisions on the outskirts, convinced the momentum would hold. But by 2025, that momentum has stalled out completely. Home prices have dropped roughly 8% over the past year, and inventory is piling up faster than buyers can absorb it. Homes that sold for $300,000 in late 2022 are now struggling to move at $275,000, even with seller concessions and repairs included. At number 11, we have Scranton, Pennsylvania. Scranton carries a kind of nostalgic weight, known more for TV references than real estate headlines. But during the pandemic, it caught a surprising wave of attention. Remote workers from New York and Philadelphia discovered they could buy charming older homes for a fraction of what they'd pay closer to the city. For a brief window, Scranton felt like it was on the verge of a comeback. Prices ticked up. Listings moved faster. Local officials talked optimistically about revitalization and new investment. That optimism didn't last. By 2025, home prices in Scranton have tumbled about 9%, and the market has gone ice cold. Homes that generated multiple offers 2 years ago are now sitting unsold for 6 months or longer. Number 10 takes us to Rockford, Illinois. Rockford sits about 90 minutes northwest of Chicago, close enough to feel connected, but far enough to stay affordable. During the height of the housing frenzy, that proximity seemed like an advantage. Buyers priced out of the Chicago suburbs started looking further out, and Rockford caught some of that overflow. For a year or two, the market felt almost hot. Homes moved quickly. Prices inched upward. Optimism spread through a city that hadn't seen much of it in decades. But that momentum has completely reversed. In 2025, home prices in Rockford have fallen roughly 10%, and the market is struggling to find a floor. Properties listed at $200,000 are being reduced to $175,000, then $160,000, and still sitting without offers. The local economy, long anchored by manufacturing, has been battered by layoffs and factory closures. Major employers have downsized or moved operations overseas. The jobs that remain don't pay enough to support homeownership at the prices sellers are asking. At the same time, Rockford is dealing with population loss. Younger residents leave for better opportunities in bigger cities. At number 9, Killeen, Texas. Killeen is a military town through and through, sitting right next to Fort Cavazos, one of the largest army bases in the country. For years, that military presence provided stability. Soldiers rotated in and out. Contractors followed. Families settled nearby. The housing market hummed along, not flashy, but reliable. Then the pandemic boom arrived, and Killeen got swept up in the Texas frenzy. Investors piled in, betting on continued growth. Builders threw up new subdivisions aimed at first-time buyers and military families. Prices shot up faster than the local economy could support. Now, in 2025, the market is unraveling. Home prices have dropped about 11%, and inventory is stacking up with no clear relief in sight. Homes that sold for $240,000 are now listed at $210,000 and still not moving. The military connection that once felt like an advantage has become a limitation. Soldiers get housing allowances, but those allowances haven't kept pace with the inflated prices from the boom years. Number 8 brings us to Lansing, Michigan. Lansing is the state capital, home to Michigan State University, and historically tied to the auto industry. For a long time, that combination kept the housing market fairly stable. State jobs provided steady income. The university brought students and faculty, and even as manufacturing declined, enough economic activity remained to keep home prices from crashing. But 2025 has been brutal. Prices have fallen about 12%, and sellers are panicking. Homes are sitting on the market for months. Open houses draw sparse crowds. Price reductions have become routine, and even those aren't enough to generate offers. The core problem is stagnation. Lansing's economy isn't collapsing, but it isn't growing either. State government jobs are stable but underpaid. The university provides some demand, but students rent, they don't buy. And the manufacturing sector that once anchored the region continues to shrink. Younger graduates leave for Detroit, Chicago, or further. The population is aging, incomes are flat, and property taxes keep climbing to cover budget shortfalls. That's a recipe for a dying housing market. Investors who thought they could profit from rental properties near campus are now dealing with high vacancy rates and low rents that don't cover expenses. Landlords are selling, adding even more supply to an already oversaturated market. Neighborhoods on the south side and older areas near downtown are seeing the worst declines. Homes that would have sold for $150 a few years ago are now listed under $120 and still not attracting interest. Some properties have been on the market for over a year with multiple price cuts and zero offers. It's not just about price anymore. Buyers don't see a future in Lansing. They see a slow-moving economy, cold winters, limited job prospects, and a housing stock that's aging faster than it's being maintained. For sellers stuck with properties they can't unload, 2025 feels like being trapped in slow motion. Lansing isn't making headlines, but it's quietly becoming one of the toughest housing markets in the Midwest, and there's no clear turnaround on the horizon. At number 7, Youngstown, Ohio. Youngstown's struggles aren't new. The city has been in decline for decades, ever since the steel industry collapsed in the late 70s. Population has dropped by more than half since its peak. Entire neighborhoods have been abandoned, and the housing market has been weak for so long that rock bottom started to feel normal. But even Youngstown experienced a brief flicker of hope during the pandemic. Investors looking for dirt-cheap properties bought up homes in bulk, hoping to rent them out or flip them for modest gains. Prices, which had been scraping the floor, ticked up slightly. For a moment, it felt like maybe, just maybe, the city had found a baseline. That moment is over. In 2025, home prices in Youngstown have dropped another 13%, pushing the market into territory that barely qualifies as a market anymore. Homes are selling for $20,000, $15,000, sometimes less. And even at those prices, buyers are scarce. The investors who rushed in are now rushing out, realizing that rental income can't cover costs when tenants can't pay, and properties require constant repairs. Many are abandoning homes outright, walking away rather than continue pouring money into a losing bet. The city is littered with vacant structures. Some blocks have more empty houses than occupied ones. Code enforcement is overwhelmed. Demolitions can't keep pace with the decay. And every abandoned home drags down the value of the ones still standing. For the residents who remain, mostly older, lower income, or simply unable to leave, the collapsing market is devastating. Their homes, often their only asset, are worth almost nothing. Selling isn't an option. Staying means watching the neighborhood deteriorate further. Youngstown's crash isn't dramatic because it's been happening in slow motion for 40 years. But 2025 marks a new low, a recognition that some cities may never recover. The market isn't correcting, it's disappearing. And for anyone still holding property there, the question isn't when it will bounce back, it's whether it's worth holding on to at all. Number 6 takes us to Syracuse, New York. Syracuse sits in the heart of upstate New York, a region that used to thrive on manufacturing and transportation. Those days are long gone. The population has been shrinking for decades. The economy is anchored by healthcare, education, and a few remaining industrial operations, none of which pay particularly well. Winters are brutal. Taxes are high. And for years, the only people buying homes were locals with limited options. The pandemic brought a brief spike. Remote workers from New York City and Boston looked upstate for cheaper living. Syracuse got a small taste of that attention. Prices rose modestly. Inventory tightened slightly. It felt like progress. But by 2025, that progress has reversed with force. Home prices have fallen roughly 12%. And the market is flooded with listings that won't move. Sellers are slashing prices, offering credits, even paying closing costs, and still struggling to find buyers. The remote work wave that lifted the market has receded. Workers were called back to offices. The appeal of a cheaper house 4 hours from the city faded when the commute became real again. At the same time, Syracuse's property taxes, some of the highest in the nation, are scaring off potential buyers. People see the low purchase prices and get excited, then they see the annual tax bill and walk away. It's a trap that's hard to escape. Lower home values mean lower tax revenue, which forces the city to raise rates even higher, which drives more people away. Investors thought they could buy rental properties on the cheap and generate steady income. Instead, they're dealing with tenants who can't afford rent increases, aging homes that need constant maintenance, and a market where selling at any price is nearly impossible. Entire neighborhoods on the north and west sides are dotted with for sale signs that have been up for months. Some homes have been relisted multiple times with different agents, different prices, and the same result: nothing. Syracuse isn't collapsing in a single dramatic crash. It's slowly sinking under the weight of high taxes, low incomes, harsh weather, and a population that keeps leaving. In 2025, the city is a cautionary tale about what happens when all the fundamentals point in the wrong direction and there's no catalyst strong enough to turn it around. At number 5, we arrive in Flint, Michigan. Flint's name carries weight for all the wrong reasons. The water crisis that started in 2014 exposed deep dysfunction, poverty, and neglect. A decade later, the scars remain. The population has continued to shrink. Trust in local government is shattered, and the housing market, which was already on life support, is now barely breathing. During the brief national housing surge, a few opportunistic investors bought properties in Flint for almost nothing, betting on some kind of turnaround. That bet has failed spectacularly. In 2025, home prices have dropped another 14%, and in many neighborhoods, homes are being given away for less than the cost of a used car. Properties listed at $30,000 sit unsold for a year. Homes sell for $10,000, $5,000, sometimes even less, and buyers still hesitate. The reason is simple. Owning a home in Flint often costs more than it's worth. Property taxes remain high despite plummeting values. Insurance is expensive. Repairs are constant because much of the housing stock is old and poorly maintained. And even if you fix up a property, there's no guarantee you'll find a renter or a buyer. The local economy offers almost nothing. Jobs are scarce and low-paying. The tax base has eroded so much that basic services are unreliable. Schools are underfunded. Crime remains a persistent problem. And the legacy of the water crisis still hangs over everything. People don't want to move to Flint. They want to leave. Investors who bought in bulk are now trying to offload properties as fast as possible, taking massive losses just to stop the financial bleeding. Many have simply walked away, abandoning homes to the city. Entire blocks are now virtually empty, a patchwork of boarded-up houses, overgrown lots, and the occasional occupied home surrounded by decay. Flint's housing market isn't crashing in 2025 because it already crashed years ago. What's happening now is the long, painful aftermath, a market that can't find a bottom because there's no foundation left to stand on. For the people still living there, home ownership isn't a dream, it's a burden. And in 2025, that burden is only getting heavier. Number 4 takes us to Dayton, Ohio. Dayton used to be an industrial powerhouse, a city that helped build America with manufacturing, innovation, and a strong middle class. But like so many Rust Belt cities, those glory days are distant memories. The factories closed, the jobs disappeared, the population dropped, and the housing market has been stuck in decline for decades. The pandemic boom barely touched Dayton. Prices nudged up slightly, but nothing like the explosions seen in Sunbelt cities or coastal metros. By 2025, even that small gain has evaporated. Home prices have fallen about 13% over the past year, and the market is drowning in inventory. Homes that were listed at $130,000 are now down to $110,000, then $100,000, and still sitting without offers. The local economy is the core issue. Dayton's job market is weak. The biggest employers are healthcare systems and Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, both stable but not drivers of growth. Wages are low, opportunities are limited, and younger residents leave as soon as they can, heading to Columbus, Cincinnati, or out of state entirely. What's left is an aging population with shrinking income and a housing stock that's deteriorating faster than it can be maintained. Investors who thought they could scoop up cheap properties and rent them out are learning the hard way that low purchase prices don't matter if nobody can afford the rent. Vacancy rates are climbing, rental income is falling, and the costs of maintenance, taxes, and insurance are eating into any potential profit. Many are cutting their losses and selling, which only adds more supply to a market that's already oversaturated. Neighborhoods on the west side and parts of East Dayton are seeing the steepest declines. Streets that were once solidly middle class now have multiple abandoned homes. Buyers who do show interest are mostly bargain hunters looking for properties under $50,000, and even they're picky. Dayton isn't just cheap, it's stuck. Prices are low, but so is demand. The economy isn't strong enough to support a healthy housing market, and there's no sign that's changing anytime soon. In 2025, Dayton is a stark reminder that some cities can't recover without a fundamental economic transformation, and that transformation is nowhere in sight. At number 3, Peoria, Illinois. Peoria sits along the Illinois River, about 2.5 hours south of Chicago. For much of the 20th century, it was a thriving manufacturing hub, home to Caterpillar's headquarters and a strong blue-collar economy. But the 21st century has not been kind. Manufacturing jobs have steadily disappeared. Caterpillar has shifted operations overseas. Population has declined, and the housing market has been weak for years. The brief pandemic surge brought a flicker of activity. A few buyers from Chicago looked south for affordability. Prices ticked up modestly. Inventory moved a little faster, but that didn't last. By 2025, Peoria's housing market is in freefall. Prices have dropped roughly 14%, and homes are sitting unsold for months on end. Properties that were listed at $160 are now down to $135 and still generating zero interest. Sellers are desperate, slashing prices, offering to cover closing costs, throwing in appliances, anything to attract a buyer. The problem is twofold. First, the local economy is stagnant. Jobs are scarce. Wages are low. The population is aging and shrinking. Young people leave for better opportunities elsewhere, and nobody is moving in to replace them. Second, Illinois' tax environment is brutal. Property taxes are among the highest in the nation, and they keep climbing as the state scrambles to cover massive budget deficits. Buyers see the low home prices and think they're getting a deal. Then they see the annual tax bill and walk away. It's a vicious cycle. Low prices mean low revenue, which forces higher tax rates, which drives more people away, which lowers prices further. Investors are bailing out. Rental properties that seemed like safe bets a few years ago are now financial traps. Tenants can't afford higher rents. Maintenance costs keep rising. And selling at a profit is impossible. Many landlords are unloading properties at steep losses just to stop the bleeding. Neighborhoods on the south side and older areas near downtown are the hardest hit. Blocks that used to be filled with families now have multiple vacant homes. Some have been empty for years. Peoria isn't collapsing overnight, It's eroding slowly, steadily, painfully, and in 2025, there's no sign the decline is slowing down. The market isn't correcting, it's contracting. And for anyone still holding property in Peoria, the question isn't if they'll lose money, it's how much. Number 2 takes us to Gary, Indiana. Gary's story is one of the most tragic in American urban history. Once a booming steel town with over 200,000 residents, it's now a shadow of its former self. The population has dropped by more than 60%. Entire neighborhoods have been abandoned. Crime rates are among the highest in the nation. And the housing market, if you can even call it that, is effectively dead. During the pandemic, a handful of investors tried to buy properties in Gary for next to nothing, hoping for some kind of miracle turnaround. That miracle never came. In 2025, home prices have fallen another 15%, and in many parts of the city, homes are being sold for less than $1,000. Some are literally given away. Even at those prices, there are almost no takers. The reason is obvious. Owning property in Gary is a financial nightmare. Property taxes remain high despite home values that have collapsed to nearly zero. Insurance is expensive and hard to get. Basic services like police and fire protection are unreliable, and the properties themselves are often in terrible condition, requiring tens of thousands of dollars in repairs just to be habitable. Investors who bought in bulk are now abandoning properties faster than they acquired them. The cost of holding on to them, between taxes, insurance, and maintenance, far exceeds any potential return. Many have simply stopped paying taxes and walked away, leaving the city to deal with the fallout. Entire sections of Gary are now essentially ghost towns, blocks with rows of empty houses, boarded windows, overgrown yards, streets that feel post-apocalyptic. The few residents who remain are mostly older, lower income, or unable to leave. Their homes are worth virtually nothing. Selling isn't an option. Staying means living in a city that's slowly disappearing around them. Gary's housing market didn't just crash in 2025. It ceased to exist in any meaningful way. What's left is a grim reminder of what happens when economic collapse, population loss, and civic failure converge. For anyone still holding property in Gary, the only question is how to get out, because staying is just throwing money into a void. In 2025, Gary isn't a market, it's a warning. And now, number 1, Detroit, Michigan. Detroit sits at the top of this list not because it's the cheapest, though parts of it certainly are, but because of the sheer scale and symbolism of its housing collapse. This is a city that once stood as the beating heart of American industry. Motor City, Motown, a place that built the middle class and shaped the 20th century. At its peak, Detroit had nearly 2 million residents. Today, that number is under 650,000. Entire neighborhoods have been abandoned. Tens of thousands of homes sit vacant. And the housing market, despite attempts at revitalization, remains deeply broken. In 2025, home prices in Detroit have dropped another 16%. In some neighborhoods, homes are selling for $5,000, $3,000, even less. And still, buyers are hard to find. The city's east side and large sections of the west side are almost entirely abandoned. Blocks with only 1 or 2 occupied homes. Streets lined with burned-out shells and collapsing structures. Investors who rushed in a decade ago, hoping to catch the bottom and ride a recovery, are now fleeing in droves. The reality is brutal. Owning property in much of Detroit costs far more than it's worth. So there you have it, 12 cities where home prices are plummeting and properties are selling for almost nothing. From Rust Belt cities like Detroit and Gary to smaller metros like Killeen and Peoria, the housing collapse of 2025 is exposing deep cracks in the foundation of the American dream. These aren't just numbers. They're communities unraveling, families losing wealth, and entire cities questioning their future. For buyers, these markets might look like opportunities, but the reality is far more complicated. Low prices don't matter if there are no jobs, no services, and no hope for recovery. If this breakdown gave you a new perspective on what's really happening in American housing, make sure you're subscribed because we'll keep tracking these shifts as they unfold. Share this video with anyone trying to make sense of the housing market right now. And as always, the story isn't over. It's just beginning.